It was a cold night in a small village on the outskirts of Chicago. Mike, a man who had traded the tranquility of a simple life for the allure of Los Angeles, was returning for the first time in 20 years. The town seemed smaller. The familiar streets carried long-buried memories. Tired and hungry, he decided to have dinner at a restaurant he used to frequent in his youth. As he stepped inside, he was immediately overcome by nostalgia. The tables were the same, the smell of homemade food filled the air, and he couldn't help but smile. However, something caught his attention in a corner of the restaurant. His eyes fixed on a woman he would recognize anywhere, even after 2 decades. "Lisa," he whispered to himself, his heart racing. She was sitting at a table with a young man who, even from a distance, looked eerily familiar. Mike felt a tightness in his chest and for a moment hesitated. The young man turned, and the resemblance was undeniable. The eyes, the smile. He was looking at a younger version of himself. "No, it can't be," Mike murmured, confused. Could Lisa be dating someone younger? His mind racing, he knew he couldn't let this go. He walked toward the table, trying to remain calm. Each step felt heavier than the last. "Lisa," he finally said, stopping beside them. She looked up, and for a second, she seemed frozen, as if she had seen a ghost. Mike saw the surprise on her face transform into a mixture of anger and sadness. "Mike," she replied, her voice trembling. The silence that followed was almost palpable, and the young man beside her looked back and forth, confused. "Who is he, Mom?" the young man asked, his eyes fixed on Mike, piercing him with an inquisitive gaze. Lisa took a deep breath before answering, as if gathering the strength to say those words. "David, this is Mike, your father." The world seemed to spin around Mike. He felt dizzy, breathless. Everything he thought he knew about himself in the past crumbled in front of that simple sentence. "My father?" David repeated, disbelief in every syllable. "You abandoned us, and now you show up here as if nothing happened?" Mike felt the weight of guilt flood his chest. He tried to respond, but the words wouldn't come. I didn't know." But before he could say anything more, David stood up, his eyes burning with anger. "You never cared. You have no right to show up here and act like you're part of our lives." With those words, David walked away, leaving Mike paralyzed, trapped between regret and despair. Lisa, visibly shaken, slowly stood up, her words cutting through the silence like a blade. "You should have stayed in Los Angeles, Mike. This isn't your place." She turned and followed her son, leaving Mike alone in the restaurant, staring at the empty space where they had been, trying to understand how he had lost everything without even realizing it. Mike stood frozen in the restaurant, Lisa and David's words echoing in his mind. The people around him continued eating and chatting, oblivious to the emotional earthquake that had just happened at that table. He finally leaves the restaurant, still dazed. Outside, the cold night air hits him like a slap, but he barely feels it. His mind is stuck on a single thought. David is my son. Mike leans against the restaurant wall, trying to catch his breath. He needs to process everything. How could he not have known? How did he not suspect that Lisa might have been pregnant when he left her to pursue his dreams? A whirlwind of questions consumes him. Feeling the weight of guilt grow, he decides to head back to the hotel where he's staying. On the way, the memory of the young man with the same features he never stopped recognizing haunts him. He needs to confirm, to understand what happened. The next morning, Mike can't stay still. He decides to look for Lisa at the restaurant, but she's not there. He realizes he knows nothing about her life, where she lives, how she survived all these years. Desperate for answers, he finds the courage to do something he never thought he would: hire a private investigator. Maybe this way he can find Lisa and David and understand the story that was stolen from all of them. A few days later, the investigator meets him at the same restaurant to deliver the report. Mike opens the envelope with trembling hands. The first pages contain basic information about Lisa and what she has been doing over the past few years. He flips through quickly until he finds what interests him most: details about David. David Taylor, born August 15th, 2003, he reads aloud. Mike's heart tightens as he sees the birth date. Doing the math quickly, he realizes that Lisa was already pregnant when he left for Los Angeles. His eyes burning with guilt, he continues reading. He learns that David faced a tough childhood, marked by absences and challenges. Lisa worked 2 jobs to support them, and David, growing up without a father figure, got involved with the wrong crowd and eventually with drugs. Seeing Mike's expression, the detective tries to offer some comfort. It seems he had a rough life, sir. Lisa did what she could, but addiction? It's a tough battle. Mike closes his eyes, trying to absorb the reality. His son went through all of this while he was chasing fame and fortune. Feeling crushed by the weight of his choices, he takes a deep breath and asks the detective, "Is he okay now? Did Lisa manage to help?" The detective hesitates before answering. "Not completely. David has been to rehab a few times but is still struggling. He still lives with Lisa, and she helps him as much as she can, but it's a constant battle." Mike feels a lump forming in his throat. He doesn't know how to handle this. How can he make up for lost time? How can he help someone he barely knows, but who is his son? He thanks the detective and says goodbye. Back at the hotel, Mike locks himself in his room, staring out the window. As the sun sets, he whispers to himself, "I need to do something. I can't just disappear again." But he knows it won't be easy. David hates him, and rightfully so. Mike wonders if it's too late to try and fix what's broken. The past weighs like an anchor, and the thought that he may never earn his son's forgiveness eats him alive. The following days are torture for Mike. He wanders around the city unsure of what to do. The detective's documents are scattered across the hotel table, each page a painful reminder of everything he has lost. Photos of David growing up, struggling, falling, and trying to rise again, all without him. Finally, he decides he needs to try talking to Lisa again. It's late in the afternoon, and Mike heads to her restaurant. As he walks in, he notices it's quiet. Lisa is at the back, alone, cleaning a table. Mike takes a deep breath and walks over to her. "Lisa, can we talk?" he asks, his voice trembling, reflecting the fear of being rejected. Lisa straightens up and crosses her arms, looking at him with a hard and tired expression. "What do you want, Mike? You think you can just show up here and change everything with a snap of your fingers?" She replies, her voice filled with bitterness. I didn't know I had a son," Mike begins, trying to find the right words. "If I had known, things would have been different." "Different?" Lisa laughs, but it's a dry, bitter laugh. "You left us without a second thought, Mike. I loved you, and you just walked away, as if none of this mattered." Mike lowers his head, feeling the weight of every word. He knows she's right. "I know I messed up, Lisa. I can't change the past, but I want to be part of your lives now. I want to help David." "You think it's that simple?" She snaps back, tears forming in her eyes. "David spent years asking about you, wanting to know why his dad abandoned him. He grew up feeling like he wasn't good enough, like he didn't deserve to be loved. And now you show up and think everything's going to be okay?" Mike feels a deep pain hearing that. He never imagined his choices had caused so much suffering. "Please, Lisa, let me help. I want to be there for him, for you." Lisa shakes her head, her face marked by sadness and exhaustion. "You don't understand, Mike. David doesn't need empty promises. He needs stability, someone who won't disappear at the first sign of trouble. And you've already shown that you don't know how to stay." Mike feels the sting of her words, but remains determined. "I know I can't change what I did, but I want to try. I owe him that much, and I owe it to you." Lisa looks at him for a long moment, as if trying to decide if there's still something good left in the man she once loved so much. But then she sighs, defeated. "I don't know if you can fix this, Mike. I don't know if David will ever forgive you. But if you really want to try, you're going to have to prove it. And not to me, but to him." Mike nods, aware that the road ahead will be long and hard. "I'll prove it, Lisa. I'll show David that I'm here to stay." Lisa gives him one last weary look and turns her back, returning to work. Mike stands there for a moment, feeling the weight of his decisions, but also a new determination growing inside him. He doesn't have all the answers, but he knows one thing: he won't run away anymore. As he leaves the restaurant, the sun is setting, painting the sky a soft orange. Mike takes a deep breath and looks at the horizon. For the first time in many years, he feels a faint hope rising. He knows it won't be easy, but he's willing to do whatever it takes to regain his son's trust. In the following days, Mike tries to approach David as cautiously as possible. He finds out that David works at an auto repair shop in town. Determined to make contact, Mike decides to show up there, hoping that seeing him in a more relaxed environment, his son might be willing to listen. Upon arrival, Mike spots David next to a car covered in grease, focused on the engine. He hesitates for a moment, but gathers the courage and approaches slowly. "David," Mike begins, his voice calm but uncertain. David lifts his head, his gaze hardened and tired. He wipes his hands on a dirty rag before responding, his tone emotionless. "What are you doing here? Come to rub in my face how much of an exemplary father you are now?" "No, I just want to talk," Mike replies, keeping his tone steady. "I want you to know that I'm here to help. I don't want to run from my mistakes." David lets out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "You think you can just show up out of nowhere and everything will be fine? You think you can fix 20 years in a day?" Mike swallows hard. He knows it will be difficult, but each word from David feels like a knife to his chest. "I know I can't change the past, but I want to be here for you now in any way you need." "Oh, sure. Now you want to be present," David retorts with sarcasm. "Where were you when I was a kid, asking about you every day? Where were you when I decided that the only way to escape the pain was through drugs?" Mike feels the guilt wash over him. He takes a step back, trying to find the right words. I can't change that, David. I wish I could go back in time, but I can't. I just want you to know that I'm here now, and I'll do whatever it takes to help." David stares at him for a long moment, his eyes full of anger and pain. "I don't need your help, and I definitely don't need your pity," he says, turning his back to continue his work. "I'm fine without you. I always have been." Mike knows that pushing the issue would only make things worse. He steps back, recognizing that forcing a reconciliation would only drive David further away. Determined not to give up, but unsure of what to do next, he walks away, giving space to the son who clearly isn't ready to accept him yet. On his way back to the hotel, Mike feels more lost than ever. He wants to help, to be there, but it feels like every attempt only deepens the chasm between him and David. A few days later, Mike decides to change his approach. He decides to look for Lisa again. Maybe she can help. Maybe she knows how he can reach out to his son without making things worse. This time, he finds her closing the restaurant at the end of the night. Seeing him, Lisa sighs, visibly tired. "What do you want now, Mike?" "I went to see David at the shop. He doesn't want to talk to me." "I'm trying, Lisa, but I don't know what to do." Lisa looks at him for a moment, as if trying to understand if he's really being sincere. "Do you really think it's that simple? You think he's just going to take you back after everything?" "David's been through things you can't imagine, Mike. He's hurt, and you're part of that pain." "I know," Mike responds, his voice low and full of regret. "I just want to help. He needs treatment, support, and I'm willing to give that to him." "He does need it," Lisa agrees, her expression hardening. "But he needs to want it. You can't force him, Mike. And above all, he needs to know that you're not going to disappear again at the first sign of trouble." Mike nods, feeling the weight of her words. "I'm not going anywhere, Lisa. I'm here to stay. But I need him to know that." Lisa hesitates, as if wondering whether it's worth trying one more time. Then she sighs and for the first time seems to open a small crack in her heart. "Maybe he needs some time, but if you really want to help, then do it. Help, without expecting anything in return, without expecting him to thank you or take you back. Do it because you know it's the right thing." Mike looks at her for a moment before responding firmly. "I'll do that, Lisa. I'm not giving up." She gives a slight nod and turns to lock the restaurant door. As she walks away, Mike feels that although the road is still long, maybe he has taken a small step in the right direction. But as he returns to the hotel, one doubt still haunts him. Will David ever be able to forgive him? Weeks pass, and despite his efforts, Mike still can't get close to David. Each failed attempt weighs him down, making him feel the burden of his past mistakes even more. But he refuses to give up. Then on a cold morning, Mike's phone rings. It's Lisa, and there's unmistakable panic in her voice. "Mike, it's David. He's in the hospital. He overdosed." Mike's world seems to stop. His heart races, his breath catches. Without thinking twice, he rushes to the hospital, panic growing with every second. When he arrives at the emergency room, he sees Lisa sitting in a corner, her face buried in her hands. Her body is trembling, and Mike feels a tightening in his chest seeing her like this. "Lisa," he calls softly, but she barely lifts her head. "What happened?" he asks, desperate. "Is he going to be okay?" They don't know yet, Lisa replies, her voice breaking. He was found unconscious, and the doctors are doing everything they can. Mike feels a chill run down his spine. He looks around. The hospital environment feels suffocating. People rush by, voices and the sounds of machines fill the space. But all he can focus on is the thought that he might lose the son he barely got a chance to know. Please, God, don't take him now, he murmurs to himself, not realizing Lisa is listening. She lifts her head, surprised, and stares at him with eyes swollen from crying. You never believed in God, Mike. Do you think that's going to change anything now? He shakes his head, his eyes filled with pain and desperation. I know I'm not the best person, Lisa. I know I've made a lot of mistakes, but if there's any chance to help our son, I'll accept anything. Any help, any faith, I just want him to be okay. Lisa looks at him for a long moment, and then something in her expression shifts. The anger and hurt seem to give way to a resigned sadness. We both failed him, Mike. I did what I could, but it never seemed to be enough. Mike feels a deep pain hearing that. He never imagined Lisa carried such a heavy burden. You did so much more than I did, and now all I want is to be here for both of you. I'm not going anywhere, he says, trying to offer some sense of stability amidst the chaos they're feeling. Minutes that feel like hours pass until a doctor finally approaches. Lisa and Mike quickly stand up, their eyes fixed on the man in the white coat. He's stable for now, but his condition is still serious, the doctor informs them. His body is weak and his immune system is compromised from prolonged drug use. We'll monitor him closely and do everything we can. Mike feels a glimmer of hope at the word stable, but the doctor's warning is clear. There is still a long road ahead. Can we see him? Lisa asks, her voice trembling. The doctor nods. But try not to overwhelm him. He needs to rest. Mike and Lisa exchange a look, and he gestures for her to go in first. She hesitates, but then she approaches Mike and for the first time in many years, lightly touches his arm. Thank you for being here, she whispers before entering the room. When Lisa disappears down the hallway, Mike collapses into a chair in the waiting room. The tension finally hits him, and he buries his head in his hands, his whole body shaking. Not knowing who to turn to, he feels an overwhelming need to talk to someone. Anyone. He sees a small pamphlet about spiritual support left on a table and hesitantly decides to seek out the pastor mentioned there. When he finds the pastor in the small hospital chapel, Mike feels strange, out of place. He's never been one to seek spiritual help, but now, faced with the possibility of losing David, he's willing to try anything. I don't know how to start, he says, his voice hoarse, as he sits down next to the pastor. I'm not a religious person, but I need help. The pastor, a man with a calm demeanor and kind eyes, just smiles and nods. Just starting to talk is a big step, he responds. God listens even to the most lost hearts. Mike takes a deep breath, struggling to find the words. I carry so much guilt, not just for what happened to David. Before I met Lisa, I lost another child. He was just a baby, and I never forgave myself for it. I ran away thinking I could forget, but I never did. And now it feels like I'm losing another son. The pastor listens silently, letting Mike open up. He then places a hand on Mike's shoulder and says calmly, "You can't change what happened, Mike, but you can still make a difference now. Keep fighting for your son. Keep being there. Forgiveness starts with accepting who we are and having the courage to change." Mike feels a tear roll down his cheek. He doesn't know if he believes, but for the first time in a long time, he feels a small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there's still time to save David and himself. David remains in the hospital for several weeks. During this time, Mike and Lisa take turns staying by his side, each trying, in their own way, to help their son find the strength to fight against addiction and his own despair. One of those long nights, while Lisa rests in a chair beside David, Mike finds himself once again in the small hospital chapel. The silence of the place is comforting, a stark contrast to the chaos he feels inside. He is alone, lost in thought, when the pastor he met days before approaches, sitting down beside him. "It seems you found your way back here," the pastor comments softly, his voice calm and welcoming. Mike lets out a tired sigh, looking at his hands clasped on his knees. "I don't know what I'm doing," he admits. "I feel lost. I tried to be a good father after all this time, but it seems like I'm only making things worse." The pastor observes him for a moment before speaking. Saying you want to be a good father is already a big step, Mike. But sometimes the real challenge is dealing with what we left behind. Mike furrows his brow, as if the pastor's words touch on something he has been trying to avoid. It's hard to look back, he confesses, his voice trembling. Every time I think about everything I left behind, David, Lisa, and before them, another family, another child. The pastor settles into his chair, sensing there is more to be said. You mentioned before that you lost a child. Do you want to talk about it? Mike hesitates, but then something inside him gives way. Maybe it's the weight of carrying it for so long, or the fear of repeating the same mistakes. But he begins to speak. It was many years ago. I was married to a wonderful woman, Sarah. She was pregnant, and we were both so excited, but things went wrong. Complications during childbirth. He didn't make it. He pauses, trying to keep his voice steady, but it breaks as he continues. I blamed myself for it. I blamed God. I blamed the world. I thought running away would be the solution. So I buried myself in work, in success, in anything that would make me forget. Until one day, I left Sarah too. I couldn't stand looking at her and remembering what we had lost. The pastor listened silently, his expression a mix of understanding and compassion. And that's how you ended up meeting Lisa? Mike nods, his eyes lost in some distant point. Yes, I thought I had reinvented myself, that I could have a new life without thinking about the past. But deep down, I was just running away again. When Lisa got pregnant, I felt that fear return. And before I knew it, I was running away again. And now, he shakes his head, as if trying to shake off the pain gripping him. Now I'm here, watching my son, the son I abandoned, fighting for his life. And all I want is to do something. But it seems that every time I try, I just make things worse. The pastor places a hand on Mike's shoulder. You can't change what happened, but you can try to understand and forgive yourself. Forgiveness begins within us. If you keep holding on to guilt, you'll never be able to give David what he needs. And what does he need? Mike asks, his voice barely a whisper. He needs you, Mike. Not the man who ran away, not the man who hid behind work, but you as you are now. Imperfect, broken, but present. Mike feels a tightness in his chest. For the first time, he feels there is a way, one that doesn't involve escaping or blaming others. Maybe it's time to face the ghosts of the past and, with that, try to build something real with David. I want to change. I want to be there for him. But I don't know if I can forgive myself for what I did. The pastor gives a gentle smile. Forgiveness is a process, Mike. It doesn't happen overnight, but you've already taken the first step by admitting your mistakes and wanting to be different. Keep walking down that path. Take it one step at a time. Mike nods, feeling some of the burden on his shoulders lift. Maybe he can't fix all the mistakes of the past, but he can at least try not to repeat them in the future. When he returns to David's room, Lisa is dozing in the chair, and the steady beeping of the heart monitor fills the room. Mike sits by the bed, watching David's pale face. I'll be here, son, he whispers, his voice choked with emotion. I promise I'll do whatever it takes for you to get better. And I won't give up, even if you hate me now. For the first time in many years, he feels that his words are not just empty promises, but a real commitment. And he is willing to do whatever it takes to honor them. After weeks of intensive treatment and recovery, David is finally discharged from the hospital. Despite still feeling weak and shaken, he decides he wants to try rehab again. Lisa, worried, tries to convince him to stay home a little longer, but David is resolute in his decision. I need to do this, Mom. I can't keep living like this, he says, his voice firm, but filled with exhaustion. Mike, who has been watching the conversation closely, steps in cautiously. David, I know I'm not the best person to tell you what to do, but if you think you're ready, I'm here to support you. David looks at him for a moment, his eyes full of distrust and hurt. Why are you doing this, huh? He asks, his voice heavy with resentment, trying to ease your conscience after all these years. The question hits Mike like a punch. He takes a deep breath before responding, choosing his words carefully. I can't change what happened, David, but I want to be here now for as long as you need me, not to ease my conscience, but because you're my son and I care. David gives a bitter smile. Care? After all this time, I spent my whole life thinking you didn't give a damn. And I deeply regret that, Mike says, his voice breaking. I was selfish, a coward. But I'm here now, trying to do what's right. Even if you don't believe me, I'll keep trying." The silence that follows is heavy, filled with everything that has never been said between them. Mike feels his heart racing, waiting for David's response, but the young man just looks away, as if he doesn't know how to handle it all. "Do whatever you want," David finally mutters, "but I'm not promising anything." Mike nods, respecting his son's decision. "I'm not asking for promises, David. I just want you to know I'll be here, no matter what." In the days that follow, David starts the rehab program and, to everyone's surprise, allows Mike to attend some family sessions. At first, the meetings are tense and uncomfortable. David avoids looking at his father, and Mike struggles not to be shaken by the harsh words and accusations his son throws at him. In one of these sessions, the therapist asks them to share something they've always wanted to say to each other, but never had the courage to. David hesitates but finally begins to speak. "I spent my whole life wondering what was wrong with me, what I did to make you leave and never come back. Every time I fell, every time I thought about giving up, it was your voice I heard, telling me I wasn't good enough. And that destroyed me inside." David's words hit Mike like blades. He feels his chest tighten, the guilt overwhelming him. But he knows he needs to hear this, that David needs to say this. "I understand, son," Mike responds, his voice choked. "And I wish I could say it was something about you, but it wasn't. I was weak. I let my own fears and insecurities drive me away from everything that mattered. I feel like a monster for that, and I know you should never have gone through that pain." David is silent, absorbing his father's words before continuing. "I know you're trying now, but it's hard to trust. I've always been alone, and I don't know if I can believe that this will change." "I don't expect you to trust me overnight," Mike says, his eyes fixed on his son. "I just hope that over time, I can show you that I'm here to stay, that I'll be here through every moment, the good and the bad." The silence in the room is almost tangible. David runs his hand through his hair, visibly emotional but trying to keep his composure. "I don't know, Dad. I don't know if I can forgive you. And I don't expect that now," Mike replies, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Forgiveness takes time, but I'll be here, waiting and doing everything I can to support you, even if you never forgive me." The session ends with a fragile but real sense of hope. Mike feels that even if slowly, they are starting to build something. He walks David to the rehab center's exit, and before his son gets into the car, he calls out to him, "David, I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but thank you for letting me be a part of this. It means more to me than you know." David just gives a slight nod, saying nothing, and gets into the car, driving off. Mike watches the car pull away, a mix of relief and fear in his chest. He knows there's still a long road ahead. But for the first time in a long while, he feels there's a chance, even if a small one, to rebuild his relationship with his son. And he is determined not to waste this opportunity. Weeks pass, and David continues his treatment at the rehab center. He begins to show small signs of improvement, and Mike seizes every opportunity to show that he's there for him. With David's permission, Mike starts attending support group meetings for families of addicts, determined to understand more about what his son is going through. At one of these meetings, after hearing others share their stories, Mike decides to speak. It's the first time he truly opens up about his feelings and experiences in front of a group of strangers. "I'm Mike, and my son David is in recovery. I've never been a good father. I spent years running away from my responsibilities, thinking that financial success would make up for everything I did wrong. But today I realized that what he needed was me, and I wasn't there." The group listens in silence, some nodding in understanding. Mike takes a deep breath, feeling a mix of relief and anguish as he continues. "Every time I look at David, I see how much I failed him, how much he suffered because of me. But I want to change that. I know I can never make up for the lost time, but I want to be the father he needs now, even if he doesn't want to accept me." When the meeting ends, Mike feels lighter, as if speaking out loud was the first step in beginning to fix things. He returns home determined to continue this journey of self-discovery and supporting his son. The following weekend, Mike decides to do something he's always wanted but never had the courage to: invite David to spend time with him outside the rehab center. To his surprise, David agrees. "How about a basketball game?" Mike suggests, trying to sound casual. "You've always liked it, right?" David hesitates but finally nods. "Yeah, whatever," he replies, his tone masking the nervousness he feels. At the gym, they sit side by side, watching the game start. The silence between them is tense, filled with unspoken words, but Mike is determined not to push his son. "I remember the first time I took you to a game," Mike begins, looking at the court, but clearly addressing David. "You must have been about 6. You were fascinated by the players, saying you wanted to be just like them." David smiles slightly, though hesitantly. "I barely remember that," he admits. "It was a long time ago." "It was," Mike agrees, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "But you were really good at it, you know? You always had a talent for it." David shrugs, uncomfortable with the compliment. "I stopped because, well, it didn't matter. It never mattered to anyone." "It mattered to me," Mike says softly, feeling a lump in his throat. "I just didn't realize it back then. But I'm here now, and if you still want to play or do anything else, I'll be by your side." David doesn't respond, but something in his posture relaxes a bit. They watch the rest of the game in a less uncomfortable silence, and to Mike, that small progress is already a big step. On the way home, David finally breaks the silence. "You really want to be part of my life now, don't you?" he asks, without looking directly at his father. "I do," Mike answers without hesitation. "I know it's hard to believe, but yes, I do, no matter how long it takes." David sighs, looking out the car window. There's a long silence before he speaks again. "I still have a lot of anger. Sometimes I don't know how to deal with it, but I see that you're trying. I just don't know if I can let you in." "I understand," Mike says, trying to keep his voice steady despite the tightness in his throat. "I'll give you the space you need, but I'll always be here. And if you need me in any way, I'm just a call away." When they arrive at home, David pauses before getting out of the car and looks directly at Mike for the first time that night. "Thank you for trying, Dad," he says, his voice hesitant, as if the words feel strange in his mouth. Mike feels his heart nearly burst. He knows that simple dad carries a huge weight, an openness David wasn't ready to offer until now. "Thank you for giving me a chance, son," he replies, his eyes brimming with tears. "I won't waste it." David just nods before getting out of the car and entering Lisa's house. Mike stays there for a moment, alone in the car, feeling his chest swell with hope. He knows the journey is still long, but he also knows that for the first time, they are really starting to build something together. And that's more than he ever dared to dream. Over time, the routine of visits and meetings between Mike and David becomes more frequent. They still have moments of tension, unspoken words, and a past that seems to infiltrate every conversation. But gradually, the silences become more bearable, and the interactions less burdened with hurt. One afternoon, Mike receives an urgent call from his business partner, Henry. He's in town and wants to discuss the future of the company. The business situation is complicated, and the investors are worried about Mike's prolonged absence. Even knowing that this meeting is crucial, he hesitates. The life he left behind in Los Angeles feels distant and almost irrelevant now that he's trying to rebuild his relationship with David. "Mike, you can't keep ignoring this," Henry says on the phone, his voice tense. "The company needs you. We can't hold things together forever." Mike takes a deep breath. He looks at the clock, knowing that he has an important commitment with David that same afternoon. They had planned a day to work together on a model car project that David had started years ago and set aside. "I understand, Henry, but I'm dealing with something important here," he replies, trying to explain. "I can't just drop everything. I know you have personal issues, Mike, but the business is falling apart. If you don't come back now, we could lose everything we've worked for." Mike feels a weight on his chest. He spent years building that company, dedicating himself tirelessly to achieving success. But looking at where he is now, he realizes that if he loses David again, there will be nothing left that truly matters. "I need more time, Henry, a few weeks at most. I'm at a critical point here, trying to repair my relationship with my son." "Mike, I understand," Henry responds, his tone showing that he's genuinely trying to be understanding. "But you can't be in two places at once. Think carefully about your priorities." With a divided heart, Mike hangs up the phone. He knows he can't postpone important decisions much longer, but he also knows he can't abandon David again. Deep in thought, he heads to the garage where David is already waiting, tinkering with the model car parts. "You seem worried," David comments, not looking up from the tools. "Is something wrong?" Mike hesitates. He wants to be honest, but he's afraid David will take it the wrong way. So he decides to speak the truth. It was my partner. The company is in trouble, and they need me back. David continues working on the parts, but his posture changes slightly, as if he's bracing himself for something. And are you going back? The question comes out almost as a challenge. I don't know, Mike replies sincerely. If I go back now, I might be able to save the company, but that means leaving you and your mom. And honestly, I don't want to lose you again. David stops what he's doing and looks directly at his father. There's a mixture of emotions on his face: anger, fear, and maybe a glimmer of hope. Then why don't you go back? That's always been your priority, hasn't it? Work, money, there's no reason to pretend you've changed. David, I have changed, Mike says, his voice urgent. I know it took me too long, but I've realized that none of that matters if I can't be here with you. I want to be present. I don't want to abandon you again. David shakes his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. I don't know if I can believe that. You've always put work first. And even if you say you've changed, I keep waiting for the moment you'll turn your back and disappear again. Those words hurt more than anything Mike has ever heard. He feels the weight of every wrong choice, every absence, every broken promise. But he also knows he needs to show his son that he's more important than any company. Look, I know you have no reason to trust me. I've given you every excuse to believe I'm a failure as a father. But for the first time, I'm trying to do what's right. And that means being here for you, no matter what happens to the company. David stares at him for a long moment, and Mike sees his son's internal struggle. He's torn between wanting to believe and the fear of being hurt again. You know I can't promise that I'll be okay with this, right? David finally says, his voice full of hesitation. I know, Mike replies, his voice low and full of emotion. I don't expect you to believe me now. I just want you to know that even if I have to sacrifice everything, I'm not going to abandon you again. David looks away, his posture tense. He seems to struggle with the words, but then he takes a deep breath and says, almost in a whisper, I don't know if I can handle this. It's like waiting for the next disappointment, but I don't want you to leave. Not now. Mike feels his chest tighten. He takes a step toward his son, but stops, respecting his space. I'm not going anywhere, he says firmly. I promise I won't leave you. Whatever happens, you are my priority. David doesn't respond, but there's a slight nod, as if for the first time he's considering the possibility that his father might actually be telling the truth. Mike feels that even though this is just a small step, it's a step in the right direction. As they go back to the project, assembling the pieces of the model car, Mike focuses on every detail, savoring the moment. Every piece put together, every exchange of words, no matter how simple, feels like a small brick building a bridge between them. And even with the chaos still unfolding in the business, Mike knows he's making the right choice, because he finally understands that true success isn't in the boardroom, but in the connections he's rebuilding with his son. Mike and David continue working on the model car project, a simple activity that has become a way for them to build a connection. With each piece they fit together, a new word is spoken. With each small progress, a bit of mistrust begins to fade. Despite the tensions and fears, the silence between them is now less heavy. One rainy afternoon, while adjusting the motor of the small car, Mike notices that David seems calmer, more focused. He decides to risk a conversation he has been putting off for a while. David, I've been thinking, maybe when we finish this project, you could help me with the garage I want to set up, he suggests, trying to keep his tone casual. I've always wanted a place to work on cars and, well, I think it would be cool if you wanted to be a part of it. David looks up from the motor, surprised. He seems to ponder his father's words before replying cautiously. A garage? Do you know how to work on cars, Dad? Mike laughs, a light, almost relieved laugh at the less defensive tone in his son's voice. I know the basics, but you're talented at this, and I thought we could learn together. It would be a chance to start something new, something that's ours. David doesn't respond right away. He stays silent, his hand still on the motor. Mike feels his heart race, fearing he has gone too far, too fast. I don't know, David finally murmurs, without looking directly at his father. It seems scary, you know, like starting from scratch with everything that's happened. I understand, Mike responds, his voice calm. I'm not asking you to decide now. I just want you to know that if one day you feel ready, The door will be open. And if you're not, that's okay too. I'll support whatever you decide. David takes a deep breath, as if his father's words carried their own weight. Don't you think you're trying to fix things too quickly? He asks honestly, like building a garage would erase everything that happened. Mike feels a tightness in his chest. He realizes that David is right. Sometimes he still finds himself trying to fix the past in practical ways without really facing what's behind all the hurt. It's not that, son, he says, choosing his words carefully. I know that nothing I do will erase what happened, but I'm trying to find ways for us to be together, to do something we can build and call our own, something that goes beyond words. David remains silent, absorbing what has been said. There's a long pause before he finally speaks, his voice hesitant. I don't know if I can forgive you. Not yet, at least, but I don't want to push you away again. Maybe I can try. Mike feels indescribable relief. He knows that this try means much more than it seems. That's all I'm asking, David, he says, his heart overflowing with hope. Just that you let me try too, one day at a time. David nods, returning to work on the motor. They continue working in silence, but there's a new lightness in the air, a sense that they are finally moving forward. In the days that follow, they spend more time together, and Mike begins to notice small changes. David is more open, sharing fragments of his life and struggles. He talks about the addiction, about how he felt lost and alone. He talks about the expectations he had of having a father, and how those expectations were shattered. Mike listens attentively, never interrupting, just listening, letting David unload all the pain accumulated over the years. I felt like I didn't matter, David says one night, as they sip coffee on the porch. Like there was no one I was important to. I understand, Mike responds, his voice choked, and I hate myself for making you feel that way. You were always important to me, David, even when I was too blind to see it. David looks at him, his expression a mix of anger and sadness. Then why weren't you there? Why did it take you so long to realize? Mike closes his eyes, feeling the tears beginning to form. I was lost, David, focused on things that I now see don't matter. I was running away, trying to avoid the pain of the past, and ended up creating even more pain. There's no excuse for that. But if I could go back in time, I would do everything differently. David lowers his gaze to the coffee cup, his fingers playing with the rim. I don't know if I can trust you, Dad. I want to, but it's like there's always a part of me waiting for you to leave again. Mike feels his heart ache. He leans a little closer to his son, trying to convey sincerity in every word. I'm not going anywhere, David, and I know I can't ask you to believe that right away. I can only show you day by day that I'll be here, by your side, no matter what happens. David nods, and even without saying anything, Mike feels they are taking small steps in the right direction. They won't heal overnight, but finally, they are starting to find each other. And for Mike, that's already a start. As the night progresses and a comfortable silence settles between them, Mike realizes that even without all the answers, he is finally on the right path. Every moment together, every conversation, is a piece of a puzzle he hopes to one day see complete. They're in no hurry. They know that rebuilding the relationship is a slow and painful process. But now, with both of them committed, they are ready to face the future, one step at a time. Months have passed since David left rehab. His life, along with Lisa's and Mike's, continues with ups and downs, but with a stability that once seemed impossible. The small steps that began timidly now grow more confident, as if each day is a brick in the construction of a new, yet still fragile, relationship. One Saturday morning, David approaches Mike as he's having coffee in the kitchen. Dad, I've been thinking. Remember the workshop idea? David starts, his tone uncertain. I think I'm ready to give it a try, if you still want to. Mike looks up from his newspaper, his heart racing. He tries to hold back his excitement, but the smile that forms on his face is unavoidable. Of course, David. We can start whenever you're ready, he replies, trying to stay calm, though the joy is evident in his voice. David nods, a small, hesitant smile on his lips. I'm not saying it'll be easy, but I think it's worth a try. They spend the following weeks planning every detail. They choose a workshop not far from Lisa's restaurant, buy tools, and begin renovating the space. It's a slow process, but there's a palpable sense of satisfaction with every bit of progress. One day, while painting the walls, David turns to Mike, sweating and smiling. Something that's become more common. "Do you think we can really make this work?" he asks, his voice filled with a mix of hope and uncertainty. Mike stops what he's doing and looks at his son, his heart swelling with pride. "I know we will, David, because this time, we're doing it together." David lets out a light laugh, a laugh Mike had never heard before, so full of life. To him, that sound is one of the greatest triumphs of his life. "All right, then let's do this," David says, raising his paintbrush like a sword. "Let's build this workshop and show everyone that we can do it." As the months pass, the workshop starts to take shape. Mike and David work side by side, and Lisa, always present, brings meals and helps where she can. Seeing the two of them together, laughing and working, brings tears to her eyes more than once. On a sunny afternoon, with the workshop almost ready to open, they gather to hang the sign with the name they chose together, Taylor and Son Garage. Mike watches as David tightens the last screws, an emotional smile forming on his face. "It feels surreal, doesn't it?" Mike comments, his voice full of pride. "Seeing this here, the two of us?" David steps down from the ladder and looks at the sign, a mix of satisfaction and relief in his expression. "Yeah, it does," he admits, "but it's real. And I think, for the first time, I'm ready for it." Mike steps closer to his son, placing his hand on his shoulder. "You did it, David. Against all odds, you did it. I've never been prouder." David looks at his father, and for a moment, the years of hurt and pain seem distant. "I couldn't have done it without you, Dad," he responds, his words heavy with sincerity. "Thank you for sticking around." The silence that follows is laden with meaning. Mike feels tears well up but doesn't try to hide them. They hug, and it's as if all the barriers have finally come down. On the workshop's opening night, friends and acquaintances gather to celebrate. The atmosphere is festive, but Mike feels something deeper. It's as if each smile, each word of support, is a testament to the fact that he and David have not only rebuilt a business, but also a bond that once seemed irreparably broken. During the party, Lisa approaches Mike. She watches him for a moment, a gentle, tender expression on her face. "You did it, Mike," she says softly, smiling. "I know it wasn't easy, but you brought our son back." Mike shakes his head, emotions overflowing. "I didn't do it alone, Lisa. It was David. He had the strength to let me try. I just followed his lead." They look at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. There are wounds that may never fully heal, but there is also enough love and respect for a fresh start. Near the end of the night, David joins them, a genuine smile on his face. "So what do you think? Our little workshop is finally up and running." Mike and Lisa exchange glances, a mix of pride and emotion. "It's more than a workshop, David," Mike responds. "It's a new beginning for all of us." David nods, and as they watch the crowd around them, he says something that nearly makes Mike's heart stop. "You know, I think I can forgive you, Dad. Someday, I really will." Mike feels his eyes fill with tears. He places his hand on David's shoulder, his voice breaking. "I couldn't ask for anything more. Just being here with you is enough." And that night, under the lights of the newly opened workshop, the family gathers in a tight embrace. For the first time in a long time, there is real peace among them, a sense that, despite all the challenges and hardships, they are finally ready to move forward. They still have a long road ahead, but now, they have something they never had before: hope. And together they know they can face whatever comes their way. If you enjoyed this video and want to hear more stories like this one, we have prepared the next video just for you. Click here to watch.